log off, shut down, and get outside at Chisholm Metro Park's historic farmstead area located in Trenton. Hi and welcome. My name is Becky Vanderpool and I'm the Senior Manager of Park Connections with Metro Parks of Butler County. Today I'm at the Chisholm Metro Park Historic Farmstead located in Trenton to introduce to you the next topic in our photo walk series. Photographer Susan Malinkovich will be sharing tips with us on photography with macro, close-ups, and intimate landscapes. Whether you're new to photography or have lots and lots of experience, or whether you'll be using your camera phone to take pictures, or if you have high professional grade equipment, there are tips here in this video for all of you. Please feel free to fast forward and rewind to those parts that pertain most to you and your experience level as well as your equipment level. Thanks so much, Susan. We look forward to what you have to share.
Welcome to the world of macro, close-up, and intimate nature photography, seeing the little stuff. Macro photography is often used to describe any time we're taking pictures that are close-up or smaller scene type images versus larger landscapes or larger scenes. But the true definition of macro photography is that it is an extreme close-up photography of very small subjects. And typically the size of that subject in the photograph is either life-size or greater. With close-up photography, this is photography that allows you to get in close enough to see a subject and details that people might not normally see. So that doorknob, somebody might be walking past that house and look at the house as a whole, whereas you're going to zero in on the small details of that rusty doorknob. So look for the little stuff. And when we use the word intimate photography, that means that we're focusing on the arrangement of smaller details within a landscape or a scene. So again, you're looking for the smaller details versus the big scene. Here are a few key concepts for photographing small scenes. We want to take a contemplative approach. We want to think about what we're doing a little bit more. We need to explore, slow down, and take your time. We want to use but not abuse visualization, which typically means thinking about what you're going to shoot before you get there, or what subject you want, or how you're going to shoot something. With smaller scenes, we want to be open to what we see in the moment. We need to prioritize smaller scenes, so that means going out and looking for the little stuff. And we need to strive to notice the details. We need to learn to see abstractly, again, looking for colors, shapes, lines, textures, patterns. We need to be willing to take photographic risk, meaning that we're not looking for that simple shot. We're looking for something that's a little bit more challenging, that you're going to take a lot of shots and throw a lot away before you get that good one. We need to learn to see through your lenses. By that, I mean you need to understand how each lens works, what's it going to capture, and how does it work with your subject matter. You need to practice and experiment extensively. Close-up work is challenging, a lot of reasons being that because you're so close, things are hard to keep sharp. And don't be self-conscious. You're going to have to get down on the ground and be in awkward positions and not worry about what somebody walking by might think about what you're doing. So let's take an example of how we can go from a larger scene to some smaller items. This is the cable mill in Cades Cove in the Great Smoky Mountains. Not a huge scene, but it is a larger image than what you're going to see next. Now we're looking at how we can take smaller scenes from that bigger scene. So the first image, zeroing in on a piece of the mill and the water wheel and the flume, the open window. The next one, zeroing in on just the water wheel and the water coming down on the spokes. Walking around to the back side of the flume and seeing the water coming out of an opening. And then getting even closer with capturing the millstone and the fall leaves on it. So let's think about composition with macro, close-up, and intimate landscapes. What's our thought process as we begin to take our photos? It's a long list, so hang in there. What do I want to communicate about this scene? What do I like and dislike? What specifically is the subject of my photograph? So you have to zero in into a scene and decide, what am I really focusing on? What mood do I want to communicate? If I move around and change my perspective, does that make the photograph better? One of the things I say all the time is don't plant your feet. Should I simplify my composition? Usually with this type of photography, you want a simple image with not a lot of distractions to it. Should I isolate the subject or include a more expansive view? So do you want it within context or do you want it isolated? Are there any distracting elements that I can eliminate? So when you take an image, look around the edge of the frames. Are your edges clean? Are there any bright spots that are going to draw your eye? Are there any overlapping elements? You don't want those merges. Do elements within the frame flow and interact with one another? So do they all seem to go together? Are the lighting conditions good for the scene? Or should I come back another time? The lighting isn't always good, but the nice thing about this type of photograph is that you can usually photograph in any light. Have I arranged all the elements in a manner that helps me achieve my goal for this photograph? So these are all things to think about as you're setting up to take your shot. Here's another set of images where we started with something rather small, the vase of pink tulips, but then zeroed in even further and captured some of the details in the flower petals and even the center of the flower, which that one gets to be a little bit more your true macro, where the other two are close-ups. So let's take a minute and look at equipment. Oftentimes people think when we're doing close-up photography that we need a macro lens, which gives you a 1-to-1 reproduction ratio. But there are other lenses that work as well. A wide-angle lens is going to connect your subject to the environment by putting that subject very close in the forefront and including some of your background. A telephoto lens is actually a good lens. It can isolate your subject, it can throw the background out of focus, and it gives you a longer working distance if you're shooting insects or small animals. You can get a little bit closer without disturbing them. And a circular polarizing filter is an ideal filter to have for close-up photography. It's not just for making skies blue. It can cut down reflections on the water as well as reflections on the foliage of leaves and flowers. Here are some additional equipment items that you might want to have for close-up photography. You want a good sturdy tripod, and preferably one that the legs will extend and lay flat so that you can get close to items down on the ground. You want a ground cloth, kneeling pad, or some knee pads because you're going to be down on the ground and you might be on a dirty surface or a rocky, uncomfortable surface, so those things will help. It's nice to have a flash, or you can use LED lights or your headlamps to put some light into your scene. And if you don't have those, you can use reflectors, and they can bounce light into the scene. You can buy interchangeable ones that will give you just white light, or they can bounce in that gold or silver light. And a diffuser is a nice item to have, or a white umbrella, because it can block the harsh sunlight and eliminate that contrast between shadows and highlights. Let's take a minute and look at a couple sharpness challenges that we have with close-up photography. The first one is camera movement. If we're shooting a large landscape and there's a little bit of camera movement, it's not going to be as noticeable as it will be when you're doing close-up photography. We also might have our shutter open longer in order to have a deeper depth of field, which requires a smaller aperture. And again, camera movement could be introduced. In terms of focusing, what's not sharp is as important as what is sharp. And that sharpness piece is going to be, again, more noticeable in a close-up than a large landscape. You have to make sure you know what your main subject is, and that main subject has to be sharp. If you're shooting insects or small animals, you want to make sure the eyes are sharp. If they're not sharp, your image won't look sharp. Ideally, you're going to use manual focus versus autofocus. With autofocus, the camera is deciding where it's going to focus based on your spot metering. But even with spot metering, the camera could be picking up something that you don't want to be sharp. So use manual focus. And use your playback feature to check your image after you shoot it. Zoom in, scroll around, make sure it's sharp, and if not, shoot it again. And our last area is depth of field. There's something called an optical law, which means that the closer you focus on a subject, the larger the subject is in the image frame, and the shallower the depth of field will become. So you have to decide how much depth of field you want. Deep depth of field allows you to emphasize the relationship between your subject and its background and surroundings. Shallow depth of field allows you to isolate your subject without distractions. And the image here demonstrates different aperture settings from f1.8 all the way up to f22. And it starts with very shallow depth of field and progresses to the background not being sharp, but being much more defined and a part of the image and possibly a distracting part. So bracket your aperture settings and then see which ones you like the best. Let's take a minute and talk about the importance of backgrounds. Backgrounds are always a choice, and you shouldn't just let them happen. Use your background to set off your subject clearly within the photograph. Make sure there's no distractions that take away from your subject or the overall image. And make sure the background integrates with the subject. So does the background make sense in terms of what your subject matter is? Does it complement your subject matter, or does it distract? Pay attention. So let's talk about creating flower portraits. When you're doing flowers, you want to get to the eye level of the flower. You want the front of your lens to be parallel with the flower or the subject that you're shooting. That enhances your depth of field across the whole image frame. Use a simple background. You don't want that background competing with your main subject. Use a background that contrasts in brightness with your subject, either brighter or darker, so it sets off your main subject. You want tight framing that emphasizes the flower versus bringing in the distraction of the background. And keep your subject from being too centered. Centered sometimes works off-center, like on your rule of thirds. That can strengthen the image quality. And we can do environmental portraits, so taking a subject within its environment and creating a portrait. So you want to incorporate enough of the environment in the background that there's some context and the viewer can understand the location. Use enough depth of field to ensure that the background is recognizable, but it doesn't have to be too sharp. So you can see in this image that the birdhouse is sharp and focused. The background is out of focus, but there's enough depth of field to give you context to know where this birdhouse is sitting. Be sure that your subject stands out from the background by looking for ways to contrast it with the things behind it. So again, that can be color, it can be light, it can be sharpness versus out of focus. All those little things that make a difference in your composition. So hopefully all these tips will help you gain an interest in and enhance your skills in doing macro, close-up, and intimate landscapes. There's an amazing world of all kinds of interesting and unique subjects when you start looking up close. I photograph with friends who are real into the big landscapes, and when I show them my close-up work, they're like, I didn't even see that. You have to learn to see this. It doesn't matter where you live, the time of day, or what the weather conditions are. You can always find small scenes to photograph. And this is one of the nice things. You can find flowers underneath the shade of a tree, or use that diffuser to block the strong sun. You can shoot at all times of day. So get out there, start looking for the small stuff, the details, and the scene within the scene. So just to challenge you a little bit versus watch this and then forget about it, give yourself a homework assignment this week. So go out and find a subject, use the same subject, set your camera up, but then photograph a large landscape. Then get a little bit closer and do an intimate landscape. And then finally do a close-up. And if you want, you can even add that macro piece to it. But here, this is a scene from Spring Grove Cemetery. So a larger scene with the reflections in the water, the spring trees, and the small mausoleum. And then I focused in on just that tree and the dogwood that's sitting there, still keeping a little bit of the water reflection. And then focused in even more at those yellow flowers along the edge of the water. And just did a close-up scene with the water and the line of reflection of the yellow flowers. So get out there, use your camera, practice, 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 but have fun.
So once again, thank you, Susan, so much for sharing your knowledge and tips with us today. I look forward to using them myself. For those of you who would like to go out and practice, the Chisholm Historic Farmstead features the Augsburger House, a Red Bank Barn, the Nature Playscape, plenty of gardens to take in pictures and use some of the skills that you've learned. All of the other Metro Parks of Butler County locations have their own unique features and green spaces to use as well. Share your favorites by tagging them with pics in MPX. That's hashtag PIXINMPX. We look forward to seeing your favorite photos. For other ways to log off, shut down, and get outside, visit the Metro Parks of Butler County website at yourmetroparks.net. Thank you.